difficult, challenging, overwhelming.
It's supposed to be a fucking RPG. What role am I playing? The fucking victim? Jesus fucking Christ!
Complete and utter bullshit.
Anything, I just want to get past this fucking
These are just some of the reasons why some have still yet to try or even finish a Souls game. Now, there are many interpretations of what a Souls game is. Soulsborne, which focuses on From Software games. Then there is Souls-likes that are games made by other developers that take heavy inspiration to Soulsborne games. Now, for this video specifically, I think it's better to just wrap up everything as a Souls game, just to make things easier. So Nioh 2 is a Souls game, just as Sekiro is also a Souls game. And just a small note, I consider Sekiro a Souls game because it still has a strong Souls identity, but it drastically enhances its combat and enemies while simplifying its RPG elements. Now, as someone who has completed a lot of Souls games, if someone asks me what makes Souls games unique, I'd say mastery. Souls games have always been known as difficult, but the main reason why we subject ourselves to this digital torture is because we want to master it. We want to slay that magnificent looking enemy with the builds that we created from the ground up, and we keep trying and trying because we desire that rewarding sensation that is felt after beating one. If you were Spider-Man and you had to kill some monstrosity like the Deep Sea King, you wouldn't be scared. You have spidey senses to dodge every attack, you have your webs and gadgets to assist, and you are strong, fast, and keyword, powerful. So when you defeat an enemy as Spider-Man, you'll be like, okay, that's cool. Now what if you are a Moomin Rider? You know, a guy who has like normal people health and damage. Go fight the Deep Sea King and see what happens. That is the essence of Souls games. You start out as Moomin Rider, and you can't rely on superhuman agility or strength. You are forced to master the enemy's attacks as well as your own. You need to time your dodges or parries and strike at the opening, and use whatever is at your disposal to take down what's in front of you. This is the mastery of combat. As you journey on, you earn weapons, armor, spells, you find new ways to attack, you realize that combining certain items can give you a big advantage, which opens up builds and experimentation to make your preferred playstyle powerful. This is offensive mastery. Now take these two aspects of mastery and dig a hole that goes all the way to the depths of hell. That is the level of depth that we are talking about in Souls games. However, to achieve this, we have to sacrifice accessibility, and that's because there is just way too much to master. Progression in Souls games is to actively engage with these two aspects of mastery, as the game will constantly throw you new and difficult enemies and more weapons and items to build and fight them. A game with this many enemies, with each enemy having complex movesets along with weapons and armor that you have to build upon in order to fight them, it's impossible for such a game to hold your hand and explain every single nitty-gritty detail, which is why there are mechanics to ease the journey for newcomers. The most popular method is summons. Rather than your enemy just focusing on you, your summon can help take the brunt of the damage and even aid you in inflicting damage. It gives you space to heal, to learn and think. It removes that stress and the feeling of frustration and hopelessness. But the problem of it all is that it can make the game brain dead easy. Most Souls games are created as single player games, so level design, enemies, balancing, they are all meant to test a single player. Add another player and it diminishes most of the challenge. And recently one game has made great strides to integrate summoning into their game, and that is Elden Ring. But unfortunately it's not perfect. I would even go to the extent of saying that it wasn't really well implemented. Now I do like the concept of only allowing summons to be used in certain areas which normally have more enemies or boss arenas, which makes sense. I also do like the variety of summons. It keeps things fresh so that every summon doesn't feel the same, but there is a slight problem, which is balancing. If you can just sit down and munch on Doritos while your summon is fighting the enemy like a superhero, then what's the point of mastery? And this is not some endgame build that took a lot of work to create. This is attainable mid-game and slightly early game for some summons. It breaks the compulsory engagement of combat and offensive mastery, as now you have a summon to do the work for you, and that rewarding feeling that we desire is lost. I know some may say that these unbalanced summons are good for new players as it is simple and effective. There is no need for the new player to learn 1001 things to get powerful, and some may also say that using the summon comes down to player choice. But unless you have been playing a lot of Souls games and desire that challenge, who wouldn't be using these summons? And when you combine the summons with some of the ridiculously overpowered builds in Elden Ring that can be attained before the endgame due to its open world nature, you can literally be an invulnerable killing machine. This is almost like an easy mode, but I feel like that is more akin to cheating. Exploiting mechanics rather than mastering it kinda defeats the purpose. Accessibility is about making the game welcoming welcoming for newcomers, while simultaneously giving the same challenge that veterans would like, which is why I would like to put your attention to Wolong. Now I did a little review for it, so check it out, but I really feel that Wolong is the most accessible Souls game for all of the right reasons. Now of course it's not perfect. But I can't ignore their innovative approach to accessibility. Wolong also uses summons, but rather than making it optional, it is a mandatory feature. Every main stage that you do will pair you up with an AI partner, sometimes even two. So wouldn't that make the game super easy then? Well, surprisingly not. Sure, it gets easier, but it isn't brain dead. Levels are clearly created to accommodate more than one player. Enemies are almost always in groups. Some enemies, especially humanoids, will chase you down forever if you aggro them, which means the technique of drawing out one enemy at a time is not very feasible here if you aggro a bunch of them at once. And personally, the summon is actually well balanced. The amount of damage they inflict is never to the extent where they can defeat an enemy one-on-one, but they still do inflict pretty substantial damage. And their health isn't too low to the point where it can be one-shotted, and also not too high to the point where it can tank everything for you. And even if you move away from an enemy, it may sometimes still target you even though your partner is nearer to the enemy, meaning that your AI partner isn't like a 100% meat shield for you. You still need to be on your toes and nail the parry timings if you want to survive. It is a good balance, and I've never felt like my partner was doing too much or too little. Now, unlike Elden Ring, I wouldn't say that every partner feels different. Sure, they have different weapons and armor, but they all still feel the same, except for maybe Hongjing, since she uses spells. But what is even more interesting is that if you keep using a certain companion, you can level it up, and upon reaching max level, they will give you their armor and weapons, which just reinforces how companions in Wolong is mandatory, and is a mechanic that should be engaged. And since the game is designed to handle that, the experience is still very well balanced. And personally, I actually prefer to remove companions when fighting bosses, because sometimes companions constantly dying is very distracting, and bosses can sometimes do crazy mix-ups. But accessibility is more than summons. Remember, new players also feel very overwhelmed, not by the difficulty, but by the offensive mastery. And as a Souls game, Wolong has a lot of depth when it comes to weapons, effects, skills, and of course builds. And this is where their fantastic innovation comes into play. It reimagines the idea of scaling, and rather than using a convoluted leveling system, it incentivizes combat and exploration to increase your morale to have a higher chance of victory. To explain it quickly, the game takes into account the difference between your morale and the enemy's morale. This will affect the attack and defense of the enemy. The bigger the difference, no matter what armor or weapon you are using, you will deal less damage and will get hit harder. So defeating enemies, putting down flags will increase your morale, lowering the difference of morale to have a more balanced scaling. This is really good. Rather than needing to spend hours on trying to understand all of this technical stuff, you can just focus on the core stats and then focus on getting your morale up. Of course, doing a build is definitely beneficial, and when you combine it with the morale system, you will be pretty OP. But remember that this is a new player's perspective, someone who is new to the Souls genre as a whole. There's a very clear and tangible progression path, because the difference in having low morale and high morale is really staggering. So when you force a player to keep fighting, to keep exploring, that enhances the combat mastery. Combine that with the mandatory summons and the progressive difficulty as harder and harder enemies will be introduced. That will give new players ample time to experience the combat, and once that is mastered, they can spend more time on the offensive mastery. However, if there was one thing that should have been implemented, was a strong incentive for solo play. Completing a level without companions doesn't really net you any extra or special rewards, and in almost all cases you want to have a companion as you want their gear once they're at max level. And yes, New Game Plus does make enemies more difficult, but at that point you are pretty goddamn strong, so it's more about maximizing power rather than the David vs Goliath feeling that we desire. So yes, it isn't perfect, but amongst all of the different Souls games, I cannot deny that Wolong has done an amazing job making accessibility balanced and fair for newcomers. It isn't an easy mode, but rather a bunch of mechanics working in tandem, which allows you to learn this seemingly overwhelming game at a steady pace. And at the end of it all, I'm positive that newcomers will understand that incredible sense of reward and satisfaction, and that will hopefully push you to master the rest of the Souls games as well. So yeah, like and subscribe.